Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us, Martin. For those who don't know, Martin is a Vendor Central consultant that helps brands who sell through Vendor Central on Amazon succeed, especially as the economy and the profit climate on Amazon keeps evolving.
Hi Andrew, hi everyone. My name is Martin Heubel. I'm a former Amazonian, worked in different departments at Amazon as a vendor and senior vendor manager or category manager as they're called nowadays. Took responsibility for the home housewares category back in Germany before I then moved into the UK back in 2018. Taking care of the snacks and desserts category and brands inside of it, particularly in sweets, confectionery, but also in the coffee space. So made a move from a very heavy and bulky product assortment to a very fast-moving consumer goods, the fast-moving consumer goods side of things, with its various challenges in each category. So very much looking forward to our discussion today, and of course, thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. Something that I love about meeting ex-Amazonians is we all have similar background stories and shared experiences. When you were at Amazon, one thing that we had to go through with every review cycle was identifying our superpower and then having other people tell us what they think our superpower is. Martin, what did people say your superpower was at Amazon?
I think it was a lot ownership for sure, because I think ownership, bias for action are quite critical, right? In order to ensure that you can move things forward in an environment which was pretty much changing all the time, specifically at the beginning of the pandemic, where you saw a sudden influx of customers that were new to the platform, were new to a product category, particularly in the grocery space, never bought a chocolate bar on Amazon before, and all of a sudden found themselves in a situation where their local convenience store was shut and they needed to kind of find an alternative to it. So I think that requires a lot of agility, as a lot of other companies would call it. And I think bias for action is pretty critical in that space as well, in order to kind of really move the needle and be agile enough to kind of adapt to the changes. Because while on the one hand, everything was focused on profitability before the pandemic hit, all of a sudden you had to switch to an availability focus also among the following and subsequent years where supply chains were significantly under pressure. So I think ownership, bias for action were definitely the leadership principles that came up a lot. Also earn trust, because I think in any organization you cannot do everything by yourself. So you have to work with a lot of different kind of teams, departments, in order to ensure that your clients, in this case your vendors, are well taken care of. And things like chargebacks and shortage claims are the ones that where you need teams such as in the finance department or also in the in other supporting departments in order to analyze and identify the root causes.
That makes a lot of sense. Ownership, because it means that you've got the problem under control. Bias for action, because it means you're going to solve the problem quickly and move quickly. And earning trust, because you recognize that your ability to solve is limited. Your ability to solve with a team is much greater. I love it. As you transitioned into out of Amazon and becoming a consultant and starting your company, Consulterce, as you sort of wrote the PR FAQ for that in your head, what set you apart from the other Amazon consultants out there?
Yeah, I think what I always saw when I was kind of having this idea of running an own consultancy in the Amazon space is primarily two things. First of all, there are a lot of good freelancers and agencies out there that can very much help you as a brand to grow effectively, to run better advertising campaigns, and to optimize the virtual shelf for the end shopper. So I found that this is definitely a niche that is very much occupied and where people are excelling in it very much. But what I didn't see, and this was during my time as a vendor manager very apparent, was that brands still didn't fully understood the business model of Amazon itself. So constantly I was confronted with brands highlighting their discontent or also their confusion around investment asks that certainly would bring and move their business forward on Amazon, but where they couldn't or didn't want to deviate from the kind of framework and investment guidances that they got internally in their large organizations or multinational organizations, which of course brings you at some point to a cross path or crossroad where you need to decide, do you want to kind of go all in a digital channel, or do you want to kind of continue your proven ways of success from the offline bricks and mortar world on a digital retail platform such as Amazon. And what I saw is really that there's an opportunity to kind of educate on the one hand, to bring capabilities to organizations that need it most, but also to ensure that we kind of create a little bit more of a balanced view in the marketplace around what Amazon is really trying to achieve and why they are doing the things they are doing. Because often, of course, Amazon is famously misunderstood. There are chargebacks, there are shortage claims that keep a lot of account managers up at night. But when you look at the end shopper side, in terms of the notorious availability focus and customer experience focus, then very quickly you realize that a lot of penalty charges are, for example, designed in order to ensure that availability for products is at its highest levels, and that processes that are very inefficient and can also stand in the way of having your products effectively listed on the virtual shelf are getting to the end customer in the first place. And I think this is certainly something where I see it also as part of my mission to really educate, bring clarity into it, but of course also to ensure that brands use these insights in order to enhance their own profit margins and can more firmly negotiate and also discuss all of these investment opportunities that they are confronted with during, but also outside of their annual vendor negotiations.
Wow, that is really interesting and super detailed. Thank you. There's a couple things that I took away from that are that immediately make you stand apart from most folks that I speak with. One is as you talk about the educational mindset piece, that you aren't looking at the chargebacks and deductions and penalties from Amazon as a defect, but rather that these are charges that are aligning Amazon's operations with the desired end customer experience, and that they're Amazon's way of driving vendor action towards the right things. So what I really like is that your approach treats Amazon as a partner in creating good customer experiences rather than an adversary that's trying to extract every dollar from you. And I really keyed in on how you mentioned that taking that mindset allows you to negotiate better and improve your margins, because the right way to improve margins might not necessarily be to fight Amazon on all these things. It might be to take the message and understand what actions are Amazon trying to drive in your business. Is that about right?
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I mean, it's easy to blame the algorithm. It's easy to blame a business model that a retailer adopts. So what I face a lot in conversations with my clients is Amazon is deteriorating our margins, but if you then actually reverse engineer where the originating problem, so to say, starts, you quickly realize it's not necessarily the Amazon marketplace as such. It is more so your distribution strategy that has been formed well before Amazon even existed sometimes, and has never been readapted to the new reality of now a marketplace taking a significant share in your overall subset and portfolio of retailers. And this is very interesting, right? Because everyone says they're embracing change as an organization, but you just have to go back in the kind of marketing world and distribution setup of most brands, and you will see whether this is really true and whether they kind of commit to this statement in the core DNA of their organization.
Got it. That makes sense. As you think about helping brands translate chargeback and defect reports into actionable insights, what are some of the reports and data that you use out of Vendor Central or elsewhere to help you do that?
I mean, I've focused primarily on the negotiation aspect. So when chargebacks are coming up, I typically get a full sum of them that have been accrued over the last few years on the Amazon account. And the biggest question mark that I see in everyone's face is then, okay, what are we doing with it? And this already entails part of the answer, right? Because you should, as a brand, not wait until you have accumulated a large amount of these chargebacks before you then think about disputing them to your vendor manager. But you really need to create the processes in order to see what are the chargebacks that are accumulating on my account at a monthly basis, and what are the processes that I put into place in order to disputing them. And this is where a lot of brands, even small but also bigger brands, fall short of, because they see it as the necessary evil. They also see it, depending on the senior leadership team, as part of doing business and a cost of doing business with Amazon. But as soon as they then hear from a peer competitor, a peer in the category or a strategic competitor, that those have had large success in claiming some of these chargebacks back, Then, of course, the flip switches 180 degrees and they would like to kind of do the same thing. But by that time, it normally is already too late. So what I encourage my clients with is, first of all, don't wait until you are in a negotiation situation with Amazon to kind of highlight these chargebacks. Address and understand first and foremost their root cause. And if you have an AVS or strategic vendor service brand specialist, then you can proactively request an overview of all of your chargebacks and the root causes. And you will also see already in Retail Analytics and in Vendor Central a lot of the chargebacks and how they accumulate, and also their reasoning code, which gives you a good idea whether the originating root cause sits either with yourself, so for example with you not confirming orders in the right time frame, or whether they sit maybe in between yourself and your carrier. And the famous example for that is if in a busy fourth quarter period you're confirming your orders, you pass them over the pallets to your carrier, and this carrier is then famously just storing them in the meantime because they need to kind of consolidate the order before they are selling and forwarding them to the Amazon warehouse. So you as a brand would think that, okay, I've kind of confirmed the order, I've passed them over to my carrier in time, but the bottleneck here is actually the carrier, which is why you breach your vendor lead time, and which is why they may actually also deliver outside of your delivery window, which incurs chargebacks later onwards. So this is why I always encourage brands to, of course, dispute erroneous chargebacks that are standing in the way in your P&L as well with Amazon, but to also really look at the root cause and asking, I mean, you will know that, Andrew, right? We had this famous saying within Amazon to ask at least 5 times the why question to really get to the bottom of what is causing the chargeback in the first place, and not to be happy with the answer to the first why question in the first place.
That makes so much sense. I think particularly as a busy business operator or Amazon sales manager, it's easy to look at a stream of negative data like defect reports and chargebacks as something you don't want to engage with regularly. And then in particular, to view it as an opportunity to dispute and claw back margin rather than necessarily proactively as a way to find themes of feedback and opportunity from your operations to actually improve what you're doing and delivering for customers. As you think about chargebacks and issues that you see across all your clients, and I know that obviously every business is different, but across all the FMCG clients you work with, what seem to be the most common problems?
Common problems are typically a breach of the vendor lead time that is requested by Amazon for a range of 4 to 5 days. So we see that a lot of clients actually deliver within 10 to 12 days. So I think here really adapting your supply chain and operations to the e-commerce and Amazon model is critical. We also see that a lot of EDI issues are popping up, which lead to erroneous ASN submissions, etc., which then leads not only to chargebacks but also to shortages, which can cause a lot of headaches down the line, and which are a hidden cost component in your P&L, because when you think about it, how a P&L is owned, especially in larger organizations, then you can really summarize it as fractional ownership, right? You may have a cash-to-order team that is looking at all of these chargebacks and shortages, but your national account managers are owning only the commercial part of the P&L, meaning they're entirely and only looking at cost prices and back-end terms investments. And if you're lucky, they're looking at advertising investments, as do all of your brand and marketing teams. And of course, then you have 3 to 4 or 5 teams that all look individually at their part of the P&L. They see that, okay, great, my P&L part is in line with the benchmark that I have with other retailers and other online marketplaces, but there's no central function that sums up all of the investments that can actually then look at and say, okay, we are heavily over-invested into this retailer, Amazon, and we actually need to kind of double down on our efforts to address more the root causes on chargebacks, on shortages, in order to get a grip on our investment model, and to also have the investment power going forward to kind of reinvest these charges back into the business where they can fuel growth going forward. But generally speaking, the chargebacks often sit, especially in FMCG or CPG categories, within the operations. So it's not necessarily something that is really outrageously new. But I think, ASN issues and also, delayed deliveries are the typical and most common root causes that I'm seeing.
Got it. So ASN issues, late deliveries, deliveries outside of the window, exceeding vendor lead time expectations, but that it's not just about the output. It's what you're seeing is that this is driven by a lot of silos internally at these organizations, where a holistic P&L ownership with view into all the inputs and outputs just doesn't really exist.
Correct.
Got it. That makes so much sense. One other thing that I was really curious to talk to you about, because even at Amazon, I was US focused. And since the US is such a large marketplace, oftentimes vendor managers are solely focused on that one country, whereas in the EU and MENA and all these other areas, you often have people managing multiple marketplaces. Today in your business, Martin, do you focus on any particular regions or marketplaces?
Typically Europe and North America.
Got it. So, and I guess across the regions that you do manage or help brands with, how do Amazon negotiations differ across regions, if at all?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, because from a high-level perspective, you do not see many differences between the way that Amazon vendor managers approach a negotiation. So, of course, you always have the kind of initial dance around the bush, so to say, where Amazon is opening with a very high demand and then brands are kind of counter-anchoring against it, and eventually you find yourself in the middle. Amazon famously uses the ZOPA, or Zone of a Possible Agreement, negotiation tactic, where they try to pull you with a very high anchor as quickly as possible as a brand into this ZOPA, so the zone where you would actually be happy to kind of strike a deal with Amazon. So there are all kind of psychological tricks that are very much, I would say, aligned across markets, because also the trainings typically do not differ that much between one marketplace to the other. I think the biggest difference that you may see is that, of course, individual programs that Amazon offers may differ between the US and also Europe. So, for example, you have in the US and North America in general, you have cross-dock, so it's a consolidated inbound, where you as a brand only have to deliver to a subset of warehouses. Amazon has started to mirror that over the past few years in Europe as well, with PIX, as they call it, a pan-European inbound consolidation service, where they also kind of take advantage of the cross-border sourcing opportunities, particularly in mainland Europe, where you have this added layer of complexity that a lot of brands do not have in the North American region and in the US in particular, because it's so intertwined. But if you, for example, ship a product to Amazon in Germany, and you also ship that same product to Amazon France, Italy, and Spain, then Amazon has created, of course, also an European fulfillment network system where it algorithmically picks the item at the lowest landed cost price, and that creates a lot of cross-border shipping headaches later onwards, especially if you have packaging that is eligible to be sold in multiple languages to different kind of end shoppers in these individual countries. So I would say a lot of the vendor negotiations in Europe, indirectly at least, are targeting this kind of behavior. And they are not necessarily also from a compliance standpoint. The brands do not want to reduce necessarily cross-border shipping, but they want to kind of look at the compliance piece, that products are only be sold to end shoppers where also the packaging is eligible to be sold at, so that if you do not have a multilingual pack, for example, this is not being distributed to an end shopper in a different country where it is not destined and targeted to.
Got it. Okay, so if I'm understanding correctly, and forgive me because as an ignorant American, I don't have the same insight into the border issues, but to try to make it real for myself, among the United States, California often has special or more onerous requirements around consumer marketing, packaging, et cetera. And so if I'm understanding correctly, this would be like a company in the US expecting products to only be sold in certain states, but then discovering that Amazon is actually fulfilling to California as well, and the brand maybe being concerned that the packaging and the product itself is not designed or set up to be sold into that region.
Correct. And in Europe, the free flow of products is a statutory right, and is also part of the laws in the European Union. So of course, if you do not take that into consideration as a brand and you simply base your cost prices and your trading terms on the local conditions in the market, you end up with all sorts of cross-border shipping that is unintended and that is actively enforced by Amazon because, of course, their algorithms are designed to source a product at the cheapest rate possible in order to increase their profitability. And if they can justify cross-border shipping it with the cost that it incurs, and they still have a profit advantage by sourcing it from a different country, then you can be sure that Amazon will take that advantage and take it as a good guy into their P&L.
Got it. That makes perfect sense from the Amazon side. I can see myself putting on my vendor manager hat and making that exact optimization decision, although really at this point it's probably an algorithm, to your point. If you were talking to a US or North America-centric manufacturer that was thinking about entering Europe and needed to consider all of the various things that you just described, what are the first ones that you would encourage brands to think about?
I think the distribution strategy, right? They would need to look at, is that really a blue ocean for them? So are they just starting out in Europe? Or what are the current existing distribution agreements and distribution relationships that they're having? So are they already selling across other retail channels, just not to Amazon? And then it's a different discussion to be had as compared to if they are not selling at all in Europe. But typically, they already have some sort of agreement with a local distributor that has kind of covered one or multiple countries in Europe. And this is then also where they need to really be careful around, okay, how their onboarding and launch strategy with Amazon unfolds. Because, of course, it's easy to just say, okay, we open and we start in the UK. We also start in all EU 9 countries at the same time. But that may not be your smartest move because you also want to typically only start with a very subset and a limited number of products in your portfolio where you have a very high chance of getting good traction in a very short amount of time, but where you also kind of forecast your margin opportunities yourself. Amazon is famously a self-proclaimed price follower. So you know already that if your product is being sold at a certain retailer that is a key competitor for Amazon at 10 euros or 10 US dollars, that Amazon is very likely to show that same price point as well. And if your marketing strategy leans against the fact that you're selling at a recommended retail price or MSRP level, then you already have a significant mistake as part of your launch strategy in your overall retail margin that you need to account for. So I would say they should always do their homework first when they are looking to expand to Europe by looking at their existing distribution setup and also by really understanding through a virtual shelf monitoring tool such as, for example, Profitero or Edge by Essential to really understand, okay, what is currently happening? Are my products being sold by a third-party seller or maybe by Amazon itself? And what are the price points on and offside of Amazon that my products are being sold at to really inform their strategy of which products they should highlight and prioritize to launch and to start even to enter in Europe.
That's such a good point. I think a lot of brands think about distribution strategy either in terms of retailers or in terms of who is selling on Amazon. But I like that you bring both of them together, particularly for a new market, because to your point, that's exactly how Amazon is going to consider pricing, not just from internal competition, but across the market through all of their price monitoring and whatnot. Cool. Going to switch gears here. One thing that really surprised me as an Amazonian going to the other side of the table was the change in reporting and data quality. As an internal Amazon person, you almost have too much data access. And not enough help to deal with it. As a vendor manager or a marketing manager who has no technical background, if you want to write a business case, you need to bring data. They expect you to bridge things down to the basis point, but there's no BI teams or analysts that are just sitting around waiting to produce this for you. And so folks like you and I end up learning where to get data, what reports to poke at, who knows SQL and how to bug them for help, etc. But that you get to work with really big data. And you get to make data-driven decisions almost all the time. What shocked me was going to the other side of the table and interacting with vendor and seller central and realizing, wow, that same level of data access is just not available to brands. As you made the transition from internal to external, what were some things that surprised you about the differences?
I think for me, the biggest challenge was that so at Amazon, you're very data driven, as you mentioned, right? Every single decision is backed up by a data point. And you also track the performance year over year, year to date, quarter over quarter, and so on. So you have a lot of data available, and you have a good quality of data dashboards, which you can use in order to zoom into even the ASIN level detail, right? And you can kind of really understand what is driving my margin at account level for my category, and how is it driven? Is it driven by rate? So is my margin going up or down because of an actual rate change, or is it because the share of an item in the overall portfolio has increased or decreased, which would be according and related to a mix effect. And typically when I speak to brands about ASIN level data and when I talk to them about a rate and a mix effect, then there's a huge question mark on why they would even track that and what the benefit of that is. So to me, that was the biggest surprise, as well as that a lot of brands do not have any sophisticated way to kind of track their top line, bottom line, and operational data. And I think a key learning for me at Amazon, at least, was to really separate between input and output metrics. Output metrics being the classic sellout or shipped revenue. And this is easy to report on, right? You can say, okay, great, my shipped revenue increased with Amazon by 10, 15% year over year or year to date. But as soon as it turns and you have actually a growth deceleration, such as many brands were considering and also monitoring now in the first couple of months of 2023, the question always becomes, when I read those reports internally, that they only highlight the status quo. So they're actually saying, okay, we decelerated in growth, minus 15% year over year or minus 2% year over year. But the so what question and the forward-looking point of view is almost never really precisely carved out. So you do not know as a senior leader, but also as a national account manager, what are the actions that are being taken in order to reverse this trend? So are we using more of our marketing budget, or is the deceleration in growth maybe driven because we have not used as much marketing budget in relation to our top line sales as in the previous period that we can compare it to? So it leaves you as a brand owner with no material decision-making ability, because you just look at the status quo and at a snapshot of where your business stands. But you do not know the underlying root causes, and you also do not address them by saying, okay, these are the forward-looking actions that we are taking in order to turn the business around, to turn the performance into the green KPI segment again. And this is for me something where I also work with brands a lot, to just define, we do not need to make it very complicated, but you need to have at least 3 layers of data, in my opinion. And this is sales data, this is profitability data, so Amazon's profitability as well as your own profit margins internally, which you need to track, and you also need to track the trajectory year over year at least, so that you compare a comparable time period. And where it becomes very interesting, you need to also look at your operational KPIs, because those are most of the time the input KPIs for your output of shipped revenue. Because if you see already that your operational KPIs, such as a confirmation rate or fill rate, is going down and is decelerating, then of course the output metric of shipped revenue is going to be affected by that as well. On the flip side, if you're increasing your confirmation rate and if you're able to also ensure that you have a higher fill rate on your purchasing orders with Amazon, then it's very likely that, of course, also the sellout performance will improve if you pair that with the necessary mechanics, such as highlighting advertising investments, but also optimizing your virtual shelf with the right content mechanisms. But this is typically not even existent. And here I can only encourage everyone who's listening and watching this episode to really critically ask yourself, like, what is the data quality that you have internally right now? If you have a Power BI dashboard, great. But how often are your teams actually using that? And do these data dashboards produce results where a qualitative insight is derived from? So can your account managers in your team actually formulate in 3 to 5 sentences what the status is, what led to it, and what they are going to do over the next 3 to 6 weeks in order to reverse the trend if it is a negative one that you need to kind of turn around?
There's a lot there, man. I'm glad we're recording. So that makes a lot of sense to me. The 3 data types that you mentioned there, sales and top line, and then tracking trends over time with year-over-year growth. profitability, both Amazon's own computation and your own, and then operational metrics like vendor lead time, sell-in metrics, et cetera. Makes a lot of sense. I want to zero in on your point about how they're looking at that data internally versus externally, or how often. You mentioned that brands can do a good job or a less good job of this. How often do you think brands are typically looking at this data, and how often should they be?
So what I've seen is, I mean, a lot of the times brands are looking very irregularly at it. Usually only when they have to dive into an issue where they see, okay, our sales are declining, why is that happening? And this is where you then also see that a lot of these stakeholders are struggling because they don't have the routine to look at data. And this, of course, also leads you down a road where you cannot connect the dots where you should be able to connect them. And where you also see that certain KPIs are interrelated, and when you have enough practice, you can almost forecast of what your performance will be. If you see that your operations team, for example, is doing a great job, then of course you will see that if you pair that nicely with your marketing and sales activities, that you almost inevitably will have improved performance in your overall top-line sales. So I think it's not necessarily done on a regular basis unless you have a sales leader or a marketing leader that really pushes the team to kind of look at it at a consistent and regular basis. Typically, it is done at a monthly or quarterly level. I have a kind of logic where I typically recommend account managers and brands to look at data at a weekly or bi-weekly level, just to understand, okay, where is the business going? Is there anything happening in my P&L where a trend is manifesting in a way that is detrimental to my business? So do I see a deceleration in my top-line sales? Do I see a decline in my confirmation rates that could have a negative follow-up effect on top-line sales, for example? Do I see that my ASP is decreasing, which will have a negative effect on my net PPM? And then the why question comes in, right? Why is the ASP decreasing? Is it because I run a promotion? Is it because another retailer is running a promotion? Or is it a 3P seller that is just having excess inventory, and we know that after a few days they will be sold out and the problem will go away? So you need to look at it at least weekly, bi-weekly to understand what are the high-level trends. But they won't give you enough data history to really kind of take concise action. Typically, you will need to derive this action out of a monthly business report where you see, okay, certain trends that you have observed already have manifested over the last 3 to 4 weeks. Now there's the time where you also need to really kind of define what you're going to do about it and which stakeholders in your organization you need to involve in order to get it done. Because it's an illusion to say and to think that it's all on us to kind of drive the business into the right direction. We're coming back to my point from the beginning. You need to kind of involve your surrounding teams in order that everyone is on board, and also the teams that have nothing to do with Amazon are pulling on the same string and do not stand in your way to kind of build the digital capabilities, but also the digital sales performance that you're looking after as an organization. So weekly, just to look at trends, monthly to kind of derive the actions out of it that are taking and forming the priority for your surrounding teams as well as for yourself for the next and following 4 weeks. And then ideally also at quarterly level where you become much more strategic around what has been achieved, what are the strategic structural issues that you're facing or the wins, and what can you learn from it in order to double down on these learnings going forward, because that gives you an entirely new point of view on how you're going to achieve your annual targets and whether there's anything standing in the way to achieving them in the long run and also after the year is coming to a close. And the earlier you can address them, the better. But typically, yes, if you start with weekly, monthly, and quarterly, you're typically well set up. There's no need to go into a data dashboard every day, in my opinion, because you just get a very short-term snapshot of data. You may be tempted to do very short-term oriented actions that can actually turn out to be very detrimental to your overall success on Amazon. So I think if you create a routine, stick to typically these phases, and you will be good to go.
I love the discipline, but what I want to call out there is that the nuance of treating your frequency of analysis versus your frequency of action as different things. And that it's important, in your words, to look at the data every week and discuss and look for trends and patterns, but that you shouldn't expect to take an action out of that weekly analysis. I feel like so many brands struggle with that concept because they don't see the value in sitting down looking at data every week if they're not immediately going to then use that to inform their weekly work and decisions. But I think you hit the nail on the head. And of course, I'm not unbiased here since I sell data, but I definitely see the value in building that discipline of doing regular analysis, even if you're not necessarily going to be running out the door and changing your strategy. The parallel that I draw is at Amazon in WBRs, particularly in retail, and that's weekly business review for those of you that don't speak Amazon. You get these decks that aren't slide decks, they're Excel printouts, and they're 40 to 100 pages double-sided in 8-point font. And what blows my mind is that in almost every meeting every week, they would go through 80% or more of the content, even if it was just to look at the slide and say, any call-outs? No. And for a long time, I didn't understand the power of that discipline. If we're going to have no callouts on almost every single one of these pages every single week, then why do we look at them? Why am I and everybody else in this room spending time there? And it wasn't until, to your point, multiple months later, having seen these patterns and these data points over and over again and hearing leaders and experts talk about how they've analyzed them, that I realized I was learning a lot of that, how to do it myself and adapting their mental models into my own day-to-day business work and analysis. It also, to your point about short-term versus long-term action, keeping your actions on a monthly cadence as opposed to a weekly cadence does seem to keep you away from reacting and taking actions that'll fix a short-term problem without line of sight to the long-term impact. It's super cool.
Yeah, and to your point, right, it's like building a muscle over time. Like the more you expose yourself to data, the more you're able to read them and to connect the dots between individual business divisions as well. And you can compare, right, over time. And if you see that certain trends are materializing where you weren't worried in week 1, but you see it now in week 3, the trend is really becoming apparent, then this is something where you can also navigate the discussions with your senior leadership team much more effectively, because you can kind of prepare them that there is something that is manifesting in your P&L that you're going to take a closer look at. And you will update them then also in the monthly business reporting around, okay, what was the outcome of that? And you are already able to talk to them around the actions that you have taken and how you are planning together with your teams to kind of reverse a certain negative trend or to amplify a positive trend even further and to exploit the opportunity that has presented itself to you as a brand in the category. And I think this is where, to your point, right, where I think the discipline is becoming more and more important going forward. Because even if everything is green, that's perfect, but you train yourself to really look at the data and you're forcing yourself to also use your gut feeling and to pair that with data at the end of the day, because this is what it all comes down to, right? In business, most companies want to see that you're using a data-driven approach, but you also need to pair it with your experience and sometimes your gut feeling in order to make sense of data that don't necessarily make sense on their own. And it's critical to also ensure that you are not only looking at data for the sake of looking at data, but that you are using them in order to support your arguments, your hypothesis, and your tests that you're doing inside of an organization, and to convince over time your senior leadership team to follow the same approach and to ensure that they're buying into this kind of overall stance that you're creating.
Okay, you said something there that I can't let go. You don't want to look at data for the sake of data, for the sake of looking at data, and I so agree. Even as a company that produces data and is responsible for helping people get good data, I think it makes a ton of sense not to spend infinite time with it. But for a leader who is struggling to understand the concept of exercising the muscle of looking at data, but also has in mind that principle of don't look at data just for data. How do they make that decision, or how would you help them understand when a situation is which?
I think, look, from a time perspective, this is why I'm saying you need to kind of be disciplined around the frequency of how much you're looking at data, particularly when you do it at a weekly level. At Amazon, we never spend more typically than an hour on a WBR when you were doing as a vendor manager and when you were formalizing the kind of weekly business report of a category. You did a quick analysis, you understood the main drivers, you understood whether there's anything off and then you're going after your day-to-day business again. Right? Of course, there are some exceptions where something is severely wrong and you need to put aside more time in order to understand the root cause. But in 80%, 90% of the cases, 1 hour to dive into the data and to formalize your kind of reporting, and that should be it. You should be on top of it, you should be looking at it for sure, but again, you're spending more time later onwards in your monthly reporting and quarterly reporting to really understand whether you need to adjust your wider strategy and what implications there are. Now, I mean, for leaders that are very much obsessed about certain data points, I mean, the key advice that I would give is always like, don't look at KPIs where you know it's an output that is the product of your past actions. Rather look at what are the input levers that you have and how can you compare them towards what's still in the pipeline for you. And the best example for that is your marketing or your advertising spend, where you compare it towards year over year, but you also have to compare it against your remaining spend for the full year or your target spend as well. Because you could quickly find yourself in a situation where you say, great, we've overspent in the first half of the year, we're running out of budget, but the peak season is still on the horizon. So here you can make a very good data-driven decision and also highlight to your senior leadership team that actually the return on invest is great, or not so great, hopefully it's great, and this is why we actually need to kind of increase our budget, even though we were quite conservative with planning it in the first place at the beginning of the year. But of course, it's a delicate decision every time. And if you have a leader that doesn't really look at data as such, which happens and can happen, then I think it's still good to sprinkle in some data points, maybe more at a higher level, not at a very granular level, to just show that certain trends are manifesting in a way that you desire and that fits your overall storyline, to ensure that also they get used to a more data-driven approach. And this is something that I think we underestimate a lot, because a lot of senior leadership teams haven't grown up in such a data-heavy environment that we are finding ourselves in nowadays. Because it either wasn't available or it wasn't digitally easily accessible for them. So it's also a learning curve for them to kind of get used to this kind of data-driven argumentation and logic. And oftentimes we underestimate that because we are newer to the business or we are in the digital e-commerce space, which is a lot younger than the more traditional bricks and mortar e-commerce, offline sector.
That makes so much sense. And in particular, thinking about for those of us who started at Amazon and then went on to work in the Amazon ecosystem, but are engaging with these larger prestige established brands. To your point, we assume that everybody's grown up with this data and that as people working with these established brands, that they just must have the same data we have, but times 20 or 50 or however many channels and years that they've been in existence. And that's actually not true at all. Oftentimes the Amazon data is the best quality and most extensive data set that they've ever had access to. And they're using it to teach themselves as well as drive organizational change at scale. I tend to forget that a lot. I forgot it a lot as I was leaving Amazon. It definitely caused some fights with some leaders at other companies as I assumed that my experience at Amazon was going to be universal. Thank you so much, Martin. I can't emphasize enough how much I'm learning in this call and how much I'm looking forward to sharing this one with my team. As we wrap up here, one sort of fun question for you. As I started my own business post Amazon, I have a laundry list of brands that I would like to work with someday as like goals. In your business, who are some prestige brands or goal brands that you would love to have as clients?
I think typically what the perfect client profile matches very much with my background when I was working at Amazon, right? So I was working a lot in the hardline space, so brands in home, consumer electronics, toys, but also then in CPG, right? Where you have a lot of brands in home healthcare or personal care categories, beer, wines and spirits. Of course, those are typically the best match because here I can also bring my expertise the best based on the practical insights that I'm bringing. And it's quite fun to work with these brands because I think they're in some are more like further down the road in their evolution, especially in e-commerce and with Amazon, where you can dive in more into the advanced structures in order to carve out and get the fine-tuning out with them. But then you also have brands that are really kind of a little bit earlier in their journey, and where they also kind of struggle to meet the demands that Amazon has as an organization onto them, particularly in Europe when it comes to the pan-European setup, and where they're very much staffed at a localized level, and Amazon now says, okay, we only have one vendor manager available to you, you need to meet us now at a regional level as well. So I wouldn't say like I have a strong preference on whether I work with more advanced or less advanced brands. I think it's the beauty of it, right? That you get to be exposed as a consultant to many different clients at the same time, and you can get to work on projects that are really exciting and leave a print at the end of the day and leave a mark. So very much, looking forward to anyone that is interested to partner up, that wants to improve their profit margins with Amazon, or simply wants to understand a little bit better how they can kind of match their business model against the one of Amazon.
Awesome. Personally, when I started at Amazon, I was a brand specialist, or SVS, in the retail program. And for those who don't know, at the time, brand specialists supported one brand, and there was a one-to-one relationship. And my brand was 3M, the company that makes Scotch tape, Post-it notes, etc. And so I'm still waiting, 3M, for you to come knocking on our door now that we provide data. And that would be, I think that would check the box for me on making my Amazon story complete.
Thanks for joining us today. I hope that was as fun for you as it was for me. If you'd like to learn more about Martin or work with him, you can find him on LinkedIn at linkedin.com/in/Martin Heubel, or at his website at consulterce.com.